Slow down, lay your burden down. Slow
Hey,
down.
welcome to Divergent Paths with Dan Dunford. I am the host, Dan Dunford, and thank you for listening. I hope that you are having a good beginning to your week if you're listening to this on the Monday that it comes out. And if not, well, I hope you subscribe and start listening on Mondays, or, whenever. It doesn't really matter, as long as someone's listening. So this week, I had the distinct pleasure of sitting down with Judy Mendenhall, who is the principal flautist with American Ballet Theater. She is the chair of the Woodwind department at Manus here in New York, as well as one of the flute instructors, and she is an absolutely wonderful person, and I have known a number of her students over the years, and they concur, and everyone who I know who's worked with her says the same thing. She is an absolutely wonderful person, and it was very nice to, this is a little bit shorter because her schedule is very busy, but I'm very grateful that I had the chance to just talk to her for 45 minutes, and happy to be able to share that with the listener. That's you. Hooray. And we were able to talk about some really interesting things about her career and about her approach to teaching and how she thinks about passing on her musical knowledge and ideas to her students, and a number of things like that. And so I hope you enjoy my interview with her. And I held the interview specifically for today because today is the opening of the season for American Ballet Theater. So that worked out really nicely for me. When we recorded it, they were just getting ready to start the first round of rehearsals for the first shows. So go see the American Ballet Theater because they're really good at what they do, and if you go and see them, you'll hear Judy playing because they do a lot of flute heavy stuff, because all orchestral music is flute heavy. That's just how it is. Anyway, that was a confusing digression. At least it was confusing to me while I was saying it. Anyway, I hope you enjoy our talk, and if you enjoy the podcast, please subscribe, like the show on Facebook, and have a great week.
Slow down.
More than it's funny when you interact with faculty members at the school that you go to, because you assume that you kind of know everyone. I've been around Manus for 6 years, and you kind of like, oh yeah, I know this person, I know that person, but when it comes down to it, you don't really know anything about anyone, which gets to be disappointing after a while.
Mm-hmm. It's my pleasure to be here.
So, you teach, obviously, you're a flute instructor at Manus, among a number of things that you've done over your career. You've been teaching at Manus, if I remember correctly, since the late 80s.
That's right. Good homework.
Yeah, I try to prepare. But before all that, like what was it that pushed you into doing music at all?
Oh, well, my father was a trumpet player, but both my parents were musicians. And so, for example, he bought my flute for me when I was in kindergarten, something like that, and he stuck it in the bottom drawer and waited till I was in fourth grade to start taking lessons. So it was sort of manifest destiny, actually.
You didn't really have a choice. It
No
was just
choice.
the flute. The flute was
That was it.
Where are you from?
From Minneapolis.
Minneapolis. And you say your parents are both musicians, like professional orchestra musicians, or
My dad was a really great trumpet player. He went to Tanglewood. He was there with Lenny Bernstein and jammed with him back in the day. And he was in the Navy and did all that kind of life that a young man does in the 1940s. And then he became a junior high band director, but he freelanced in Minneapolis and did all kinds of symphonic and jazz and Dixieland, all kinds of work. So he was my great inspiration for my career, actually. And I remember when I was maybe fifth or sixth, maybe seventh grade, going and getting his LPs of Beethoven symphonies and putting them on and getting his conducting stick and conducting Beethoven Seventh in our living room. And I remember the glorious feeling it gave me. And really that was a lot of what channeled me into what I do now today.
That's that's quite manifest destiny. You're right.
Yeah, and so when I'm in wind class now these days at Manus, for example, when I'm doing a Beethoven symphony, I sometimes I remember back to those days.
It's funny, the group I'm playing with tonight, they're playing Beethoven 7 on the concert. Of course, no trombones, but what are you gonna do?
Yeah.
It's probably the Allegretto obviously is like the most famous movement, but it's still my favorite movement of any Beethoven symphonies. I'm not a huge Beethoven symphonies guy, but that movement always,
it's amazing.
Yeah, it's really something else. So obviously you're around music all the time from a very early age.
Right.
It's just everywhere in the house. Now did that when did you decide to be kind of like, this is what I'm going to do, not as opposed to just this is kind of what I'm doing for fun in high school or whatever?
Right. So I was always very driven in junior high and high school, and the band the concert band where I went to high school was very, very strong. But I also loved French. And then when I was in college, I had to make a decision whether to pursue French or flute. So obviously I chose flute, and I went to New England Conservatory in Boston. And then it's been a trajectory since then.
Now, you mentioned, like, set up, kind of made fun of me for doing my homework, but I saw a list that you didn't have a master's degree listed.
Right, I don't have a master's degree.
You don't have a master's degree.
Yeah.
See, I find that really interesting because, well, I don't have a master's degree, but, but that's because it took me 8 years to get my bachelor's degree. And in I don't know, people I talk to, people who are in school, who are fresh out of school, whatever, all the time, not necessarily in front of microphones, but just at gigs or, at the orchestra break or whatever. And something I hear, that I talk to people about is going, getting extra, more and more degrees, partially as a way to like put off paying student loans and maybe I'm not good enough, maybe this, but at any rate, it seems to be more and more rare to find someone who doesn't have any kind of postgraduate degree work.
Well, but if you talk about people of my generation, that's quite common, because don't forget we're talking many years ago when this all happened, and it was much, I don't want to say easier, it didn't feel easy at the time, but certainly the economy was much different when I was your age. And so things were just different then, and a lot of people didn't go pursue master's degrees. I did some postgraduate work. I went to Paris on a Fulbright after I graduated.
Well, there's your French.
That's well, I spoke French before I went there, but so I did that year in Paris after I graduated from NEC, and then I came back and began studying with Paula Robeson, and that was she became my mentor for life. That was one of the single most influential turning points for my career. And she directed me up to the Marlborough Music Festival, where I joined a wind quintet, and that wind quintet was ensconced basically at Curtis, at the Curtis Institute. So we lived in Philadelphia, and we had a stipend, and we got coached once a month by Marcel Moïse, and once a week actually, by Saul Schoenberg, bassoonist of the Philly Orchestra. So this was a really lucky thing that happened to this group, because we were launched into our career. So somehow that didn't, a master's degree did not seem at all necessary, because I was already doing my career by that point.
Mm-hmm. So what year was it that you graduated from New England?
72.
72.
Way before you were born.
Well, I mean, a few years before I was born.
Yeah.
But it's funny that you mentioned the financial climate. I last summer, when we were kind of cleaning out and getting, I was helping get ready for the big move downtown, and I found these course catalogs from the early 80s, and I looked at, just for fun, not to make myself cry or anything, but I looked at what the tuition was back then, and I was like, oh, this is roughly $8,000
a year?
$8,000 a year, right. And I was like, oh, well, inflation, all that stuff.
Yeah.
So I found an inflation calculator,
Yeah.
and I put it in, and it still translated to like $17,000 a year. And
Oh.
I understand that there's a lot that goes into that, but it was still more than a little bit frustrating. But
That's exactly right. Tuition just wasn't what it was, what it is. Back then, it wasn't anything like it is now. And furthermore, when you got out of school, and if you didn't have a job and you were just kind of drifting around and wandering, trying to figure out your next thing, the rents weren't what they are now.
Yeah.
So life was just easier, I think. For my generation, I think it was much easier than for yours.
Well,
musical standards are what they are. They don't change at all. They were the same for me then as they are for you, but the economy was easier.
And there were fewer people fighting for the same.
That's right.
Same positions, but whatever. That's you deal with the things that are part of your generation, and complaining about them doesn't really help. So in that time period, I mean, I'll just mention that you're currently the words are hard. Currently the principal flautist for American Ballet Theater.
Mm-hmm.
Now, how long have you been doing that, and what kind of was the mid period, the period between finishing your degree, all the school stuff, and your post school kind of young musician type thing, and when you started playing with the orchestra?
Oh, right. So I lived in New York after all that schooling stuff. I just was here, and I was in that quintet, and we were doing all kinds of playing all over the place, and also doing a lot of chamber music and solo work, and freelancing in New York. That's when I started to get established here in the freelance world. And let's see, then I got married and had my little girl. And then when she was about 3, I was asked to do a season with the ballet.
Mm-hmm. And what year, around what year was that?
She was 3, so that would have been like 95,
Mm-hmm.
something like that. And I remember this, like the first season was just daunting. So it wasn't my job yet, but my audition, and it wasn't an audition. My audition was 8 weeks long, of having to do like a week of Sleeping Beauty, a week of Swan Lake, a week of Romeo and Juliet, a week of Cinderella, like all this huge pile of music to learn. And I remember going to the ballet one night to play Sleeping Beauty, which is the single most difficult piece in the flute repertoire, including any symphonic literature. And I was so scared, and I remember telling my daughter how I was so scared to go play Sleeping Beauty, and she said, "Mama, how can you be afraid of music?"
From the mouths of babes.
Yeah. So then after a season of doing the job, I got the job, and so then I've been doing it ever since.
So I mean, that's a sizable gap of like establishing yourself and being a member of the best freelancing community in the world, I think. But just from a amount of work perspective,
Well, I should say that in those years, then I became the principal flutist of the New York Chamber Symphony.
Right.
I left that part out.
Okay.
So yeah, I was freelancing, but then I had this position in the orchestra. This was Jerry Schwartz that was a conductor, and it was we played at the 92nd Street Y, and we played a lot of concerts per year. I mean, a lot, and we would do, for example, the complete Brandenburgs every Christmas for about 6 or 7 nights.
Just easy stuff, right?
Just
Yeah.
easy stuff, and it was such a joy. So that was my actually one of my main one of the main things that I did during those years before the ballet.
Kind of touching back on the story about the Beethoven that you said when you were younger, was that kind of always your goal, was playing with an orchestra, doing orchestral literature, or did you never
doing
really
all of it?
You like doing all?
I love playing in orchestra. I love playing chamber music. I love doing solo recitals. I really like, and I love teaching. So it's sort of a four-pronged career here.
And you've been able to do that for a long time.
Yeah.
That's yeah. So how do you kind of approach those are, you say that, this four-pronged kind of career approach. I mean, that's a lot of different things to kind of balance as a musician. I mean, maybe it's not like broadly different style. I mean, as a brass player, I kind of do like my orchestral days, and then I have my big band days, and then I have my brass quintet days, or whatever it is. That's kind of a more broad stylistic difference, but within just the classical or new music genre, if you will, that's still a very wide swath. I mean, that's taking up like every corner of the classical music, attacking every corner of what of a career as a flute player. How do you kind of balance, in your own playing, like how do you balance, teaching, I'm teaching all semester, and then I have to go do the solo stuff.
Oh, well, this is exactly where I am right now, because all year I've been so involved with Manus, all semester, for example, and the auditions, and, now the scholarship committee meetings, all of that kind of thing. And I absolutely love working with Manus musicians. I think these are extraordinary young people. And it's this is true for my fellow faculty as well. It's tremendously gratifying to me to pass the baton on to the next generation and to train them with all the rigor that's necessary, but also to try to inspire the delight of curiosity, imagination, and creativity. So, however, all semester I do their careers, so to speak, like launch their recitals and do wind class, and because I'm the chair of the department, I'm not just teaching flute lessons here. But so now I have this stack of music that I have to learn for ABT, which starts next week. And so now I just need to do my career now. So I transition from doing their careers to mine. Not that I haven't been doing mine all along. Of course I am. But now I can really focus more on the amount of practicing it takes these days just to relearn the complete Firebird, for example, not the suite, the orchestral suite, the complete ballet version.
A little bit longer.
And Shostakovich Ninth, and Rimsky-Korsakov, Le Coq d'Or, and Romeo, and Sleeping Beauty again, and Swan Lake.
During the teaching year, if you will, like, do you basically kind of put most of the performing aside so you can have time?
No, I'm still doing it. It's just you have to keep juggling all the time, and it's a struggle sometimes.
Do you just not sleep? I mean,
no, I do it all. I do it all. I don't know how, but I do. We do.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and you've had, at this point, I mean, you kind of have. Do you have like your routine, your kind of routine set? You know what you need to do to keep the flute up here and keep the teaching up here and keep everything at a consistently high level.
Pretty much.
That makes sense. I've been alive basically as long as you've been teaching at Manus. Now that's not to illustrate either
age
Yeah,
on any
yeah.
on any scale. But you mentioned how much you love teaching, right? And imparting what you know and what you've learned over your career to your students. My my question is someone who's coming at it from a slightly jaded perspective, because I just finished 8 years and I'm so tired of education on every level. Um, like, how do you kind of keep yourself from falling into a kind of depressed a rut? Yeah, a rut. Like, it seems to me that doing that for a long time would would be difficult. I mean, well, it'd be difficult and be difficult to keep the joy alive
Oh,
for a
not at
long
all.
period of
It's
time.
not hard at all. I never feel like I'm in a rut. I always feel incredibly stimulated and challenged and engaged. I first of all, the students are so great here. And keep in mind, for example, the flutists that I teach are at such a high level. Their issues are my issues, right? So we're all like trying to figure out the same thing here. And it's I think it's just a fantastic way to be a musician, to play and teach.
So when it comes to your like teaching style, let's say, I've known a number of your students over the past however many years. I've been around here, 5, 6, whatever, and pretty much without fail. No, not pretty much, because that sounds weird. But without fail, they always have the highest of praise for you. Now, I talk to brass players a lot about their teaching, their student experiences, and it's usually much more spotty as far as how they recommend their teachers. Is there? Do you approach?
How do I keep it alive?
How do you keep it alive? But how do you approach each student differently on their? Some teachers just, it's like, do it this exact way for everyone.
Well, okay, so let me see if I can.
There we go. I think I got it out sort of clearly.
No, I know what you're asking. So I have a lot of, after all these years, I have a lot of ideas now and a lot of structure to how I teach. And not just to how I teach, how I practice, how I view myself as a musician. Here's one example of how I view things. This is the lens through which I view everything. You have to imagine a pyramid. The bottom layer of this pyramid, if any of my students are listening to this, they're just going to go, oh no, she's talking about the pyramid again. But I give them a diagram of this before they, at the beginning of their work with me. The bottom layer, the big bottom layer of this pyramid is skills, solid skills. You have to have that before you can have anything. Then the middle layer is musical intelligence. And that's things like who's the composer, what's the style, what's the century, how long are the phrases, where are the cadences, where are the sequences, things like that. Mostly things you can see with your eyes. Then the little tip of this pyramid, the little magic tip, the thing that everyone loves about pyramids, that's ideas, inspiration, imagination. And everyone wants that tip. This is actually why we're all doing what we're doing. We love that tip of that pyramid. But in order to get there, you have to do a lot of those first two layers. You have to do lots of practicing just on skills, right? And intelligent approach to music. So you have to get those two bottom layers really solid first. And the more those are solid, the more that magical tip of inspiration, ideas, imagination will flow into your playing. So that's one way that I see their lives and my life as a musician. So I'm always checking out with them what their skills are, what their musical intelligence is, and do they sound creative? Do they sound inspired? Is there something special about what they're doing? So that's one approach that I take to teaching.
And is this, did you take a lot, did it take years to develop this, or did you kind of have it? Do you have a kind of a good idea of? I
don't know. He just kind of came to me a few years ago. And then another thing that I really believe in is creative, intelligent practicing and solving problems. So I like to draw. I like to paint and illustrate. So I've drawn up a lot of little, handouts that I give my students. And one of them is a creative, intelligent practicing strategy list of all kinds of ways to acquire bulletproof technique, for example. All the kinds of ways we use as musicians to solve problems. So I don't know. I guess I'm kind of to be a really good teacher, I think you have to be kind of a control freak. I think you really do. I think to be a really good musician, you have to be kind of a control freak. And all of us have some degree of OCD sprinkling inside us.
Right.
Otherwise, we wouldn't have gotten to where we are because of the tremendous work it takes to get here. So I really I'm fascinated with how people learn and I love helping them on their trajectory, helping them get from a work in progress to a convincing, polished performance. And that's very difficult because it's easy to go from 0 to 50, for example. Just put the music on the stand, right? Like you're kind of there. Okay. Then 50 to 75, that's not so hard. You got to just learn the notes. Okay, pretty good. 75 to 85, that's a little trickier, but it's 85% to 100. That's the difficult zone.
That's what we spend our entire lives trying to get through.
Yes, that 85 to 100% zone is the trickiest of all, and that's mostly what we're doing here in this school. Hopefully,
Right.
Hopefully, we want to be in that zone, not the 50 to the 75. So that's something else I think about with them.
So I'm curious what your thoughts are about, and I brought this up before we started recording, but like this kind of current musical climate of it just being harder than it's ever been for even really good or great players of any instrument to just find work. I mean, when it comes down to it, if you're open and willing to do kind of whatever, you can piece your way through it. But do you not change how you work with people, but do you kind of allow for a more difficult workplace or prospective workplace culture, more difficult culture of music as it kind of is in 2016?
Well, let's see. I'm going to answer it in a slightly different way.
Okay.
Because I don't know a lot about how a young person today goes out there and figures out, like I don't know a lot about grant proposals, for example, and how a person forges their way. One thing I do believe in is musicians need to be artist citizens. I think that's very important. People who can engage effectively with audiences and speak to them, and who have to start. I think we as musicians have to really expand our role as performer. To be able to do things in a larger way than just playing our instrument really well on the stage.
Great, yeah,
So,
you can play all of your excerpts 100%, but that might not be helpful.
Well,
to
or
you.
even being on stage and performing a great symphony or great chamber music work, we have to be able to do more than that. And so towards this kind of versatility, I encourage all my students to become artist citizens. Now, I'll give you an example. So you might recall the Das Lied project that we did
Yes.
2 years ago. Did you happen to go? Were you able to go to it?
I just remember that I had a concert that night.
So this was probably the most exciting thing that I've ever done in my whole life.
So it was,
as a teacher.
if I remember right, it was like this small orchestration.
Right.
They pushed it really heavily. They did like special rehearsals. It was this big thing.
Right. So what it was is, it's Mahler's Das Lied von der Erde. Schoenberg did a transcription of this piece
Right.
for 14 instruments, because Schoenberg would do this. He would take huge pieces and scale them down so that they could be played in his living room at his little private music soirees that he had in his home. So, and it's actually a really fantastic arrangement. I did it mostly Mozart about maybe 8 years ago, and I was knocked out by the transcription. So I wanted to do it here. So I was envisioning a whole evening of Vienna, not just the piece itself, but a pre-concert talk on Vienna, and I wasn't sure what else. But what I did is I hired the best players in the school for the
Right.
band, and we had auditions for the 2 vocal parts. tremendously hard tenor part and mezzo part. So I met with my wonderful band of 14 musicians and 2 singers in December. So the performance was to be January 30th. So I met with them all in December and said, this evening is yours. You are curating it. Do whatever you want. The sky is the limit. Here's an incredibly fascinating topic. Vienna, 1900, 1910, death, life, love. It's phenomenal what was going on in Vienna at the time.
And just that whole like powder keg, pre-World War I
That's
powder keg,
right.
there was so much going on, so many like just warring elements in that time period. Yeah.
Yeah. Sigmund Freud, Klimt, the anti-Semitism, Egon Schiele, Mahler, Bruckner, everything that was going on. So Wolfgang Schädel happened to be in the group,
right,
the clarinet player, and of course it was a natural for him to speak about his native city, Vienna. So Wolfgang crafted a fantastic pre-concert talk on Vienna. And then, do you remember Gall? So Gall, the Israeli horn player, he said, well, can we do something kind of like with video or something like that? And I said, sure.
And he has, I mean, if I remember right, he has experience with doing that kind of stuff back in Israel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he put together this amazing video series of interviews of the Das Lied musicians. Like and we actually filmed this the week before the performance, and I think it was a snow day, so there was no one in the building except us, and like we were traipsing around to the oboe player Michelle was in one of the rooms, and he would go in and ask her questions like, why did Mahler choose the oboe for all these solos? And he would interview all the musicians, but then he put it together in a way that made it seem like it was shown at the night of the performance of the event, but it seemed like it was happening in real time. It had been filmed 5 days before, but it seemed like it was in real time. And it was very original, very funny, very zany and kooky, and actually a tremendously effective foil for the profound work that was to follow after intermission.
I mean, it's a really great piece, but it's also real heavy, real dark.
Yeah. So it was really fun to have kooky, zany, and then intermission. To offset. So what I'm saying here is that, and then also Tatiana spoke, and David Hayes spoke also about death and the piece and Mahler, and so I really love doing projects that can help train our Manus students to speak to audiences and to really engage in true intellectual inquiry, not just play their instruments well. To have a sense of historical context, what was going on culturally, historically.
I had a funny experience, kind of to what we're talking about. It's in a master class or a class of some sort where people were playing solos, and one of the trombone players was playing Brahms' 4 serious songs, which is just standard. At this point, has become standard trombone rep, and he was playing them and it was fine. But then it came to light because I asked after he played it. I was like, well, what are the words? What do they mean? Like, do you know what the words are? And he was just like, no, not really. I mean, that's not even, that's like at a far more basic level than what you're talking about. Like, sometimes there can be a tendency to, well, just learn the notes on the page, make sure the articulations are good, make sure the note lengths are nice, make sure the phrase works or whatever. But there's so much more to dig into, even on a piece that you think, even if there's a piece that you think, oh, well, it's just kind of there. There's always way more to get into as an artist. And like what you said, artist citizens. You didn't say musicians or oboists or flautists or whatever. You said artist citizens, as opposed to just your flute is your brush. And then you have your canvas, whatever, that kind of a deal. But I just found it fascinating that there wasn't that much interest in like digging in past the notes, past the physical notes. Yeah, exactly. So to kind of turn things back towards the performance side of your career. Do you like that that ABT has a limited season as opposed to just like year round sort of a thing?
Yeah, well, it's hard because it's like a 5-month job squished into 2 months. It's really intense. So when ABT starts, it's sort of like.
All right, so you said it starts next week. What does that look like? Just from a
rehearsals.
very basic level, yeah.
The rehearsals start next week, and then when the actual performances start, it's 8 shows a week plus rehearsals. So, like we're doing plus rehearsals. So we're doing, let's just say, 8 Swan Lakes during the week. So as a principal wind, and the Met is huge. It's just this huge cavern, and it's a glorious place to play. You can hear a pin drop, and it just sounds beautiful even. But so to sit in any kind of principal chair, I think especially a principal wind chair, and knock out 8 Swan Lakes during a week with all the solos that we have it's a big deal.
Yeah.
So you have to really go into training, make sure you're eating well, sleeping well, not that you wouldn't anyway. But I heard the most wonderful quote by, I think it was, let's see now, who wrote Madame Bovary? It was by Flaubert, the French writer Flaubert. He said, it was something like, live a well-moderated life so that you, live a sensible and well-moderated life so that you can be fierce and original in your work. I like that. So, eat well, sleep well, and have enough time to practice, have lots of time to practice. And so knock out 8 Swan Lakes during the week, but then in the meantime, rehearsing Firebird, almost every day. So it's just very intense. But so then ABT ends July 3rd or 2nd or something like that. Then I fly to Thessaloniki, Greece to do a festival there. And I've never worked in Greece. I'm a Grecophile. I love Greece. I speak Greek. I read and write Greek.
What?
But I do. But
I'm just. How do you find time to do that too?
Because I've lived a long time. You'll see. That's just how life is. So, and I've never worked in Greece, so this will be a really wonderful thing because now I'm all challenged to learn teaching Greek, not just what you want in a restaurant Greek, but how to teach in Greek. But anyway, then there's a fall. Then Manus. Then I do a few other festivals here in the U.S. And then Manus resumes, and then ABT has a fall season as well. And we used to have Nutcracker in December, but we don't anymore. So
that's the New York NYC Ballet does the Nutcracker.
Well, we used to have it at BAM until this past year.
Oh.
But we don't anymore. We lost that contract. So so do I wish it were all year? I mean, I don't know. I like my life how it is. It's good.
Well, let's talk about like the actual, I don't know, young musicians, myself included, we often have difficulty doing this kind of what you said, this moderated, well-balanced life that to make our performing better. So I mean, you're talking about when the summer season starts, 8 shows a week. Do you get Mondays off?
Sundays.
Sundays. Okay. So you get 8 shows a week. You're rehearsing for whatever other ballet that you'll be doing
the next
week. Like from a very like practical standpoint, how do you have, like you said, kind of a well-moderated life? Because I think, when you're in music school, you get taught a lot about the like what you said, the pyramid, your technical skills, your musical skills, your artistic skills. That gets covered on many hours a day. But there's not always a lot of talking about taking care of yourself physically and mentally. Like how do you approach that?
Well, don't forget that I'm not your age.
Well, no,
I think
that applies across, no matter what age you are, like needing to moderate things. I mean, sure, I like from an energy standpoint, maybe like younger musicians might do something crazy.
You guys
and be
might
okay
be a little
with it.
wacky. Yeah, exactly. And then you'll have these wonderful streaks of brilliance. You guys have that too. Let's not forget. It's
But
really important.
there is a value to this kind of moderating certain things so you can do other things better.
Yeah, like run. I run, do yoga, things like that. Most people today do those things, though.
Really?
Yeah.
I guess I'm just lazy. No.
Many people do.
Yeah. Fair enough. um, so we've kind of tackled the teaching and the orchestral playing. Let's just talk about your enjoyment of solo, solo flute literature, solo flute playing. I mean, how often are you doing like solo kind of situations at this point?
I don't do as much solo work as I used to, but I do a fair amount of playing with one of my most cherished colleagues in the world is Kenneth Cooper, the harpsichordist.
Mm-hmm.
So he and I play a lot together. This is mostly up in the Berkshires,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and and he kind of helped change my life. I would say I had three main mentors in my life: Paula Robeson, my teacher,
Mm-hmm.
Jerry Schwartz, the conductor, and Kenneth Cooper, the harpsichordist. And I hope to be recording something with him in the fall. I hope that I can see this project through Bach sonatas.
Mm-hmm.
But that's to do these, to knock out a solo recital requires so much. One of my students is playing her solo recital in 12 minutes down in the Glassbox Theater, and what it takes to do these things is a phenomenal effort.
Mm-hmm. Well, obviously the flute and harpsichord business, that's a very specific strata of musical history. What is it about playing with Kenneth on harpsichord? What about that appeals to you so much?
It's who he is as a musician. He's probably one of the most creative guys I've ever met in my life, and he has just a very brilliant, creative, imaginative approach to music, and deep. There's such depth there.
Mm-hmm.
So nothing is square, nothing is straight, nothing is stiff. It's all so full of passion and fluidity with him. I've really learned a lot from him.
Yeah, I'm a fan of harpsichord and Bach myself. It's kind of like what I was saying before, like specifically with Bach and that, his oeuvre, and with and I love harpsichord, but like there's so much there.
Is there
that
anything?
You can move.
Do you play with harpsichord?
It's on my list of things to do. I play Bach a lot, but I don't.
Oh. Yeah. What do you do? Like cello suites?
I actually kind of avoid the cello suites because they've been done to death by trombone players.
Mm-hmm.
I honestly, when I do it, I either do arias or I do violin music.
Mm-hmm.
I'm working on the E major violin concerto.
Wow.
I've done the first move. I've performed the first movement before, but I'm working on getting the whole thing ready to play with an orchestra. But
wow,
we'll see.
Wow.
We'll see how that works out. But the interesting thing about doing it on trombone is you can, because you're playing on a trombone, there's no reason why I have to try and sound like a violin.
Right.
Like I
right.
can take advantage of the things that trombone can do, and maybe a violinist won't like it, but I don't care.
Yeah.
That's kind of just how that goes.
Would you ever play with harpsichord?
No, there's just not that many student harpsichordists around. The really good ones, you have to pay to do it, and I know there's like currently one harpsichord player that I actually know.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of and I don't know him that well, but it's kind of a difficult thing. But there's something about that, the sound, and the way that sound would combine with trombone that I find is really interesting. I don't, in theory, I've never done it. I've never heard anyone do it, so I don't know. But yeah, that's pretty much that. So. Again, I'll just say thank you for sitting down with me. This was really, really fun.
Yeah, it was great to talk with you.
Really appreciate.
I'd love to hear you play Bach on trombone sometime.
Yeah, well,
You know what you could try? Maybe you have already, the saraband from the flute, the Bach flute partita.
Mm-hmm. I'm not familiar with the flute partitas. I'm mostly familiar with the violin partitas.
Take a look at that. The saraband could work. actually.
I will.
I'm hearing it right now on trombone.
I'll definitely do that. Thank you so much, and I will, let you run down to the next thing that you have to go to.
Thank you, Dan. Pleasure to talk with you.